Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters on France 24. I'm Nadia Massi. In the show this week, as Israel's ground war gets underway in Gaza, we look back at previous military operations in the enclave. Did they achieve their aims, and at what human cost? And with the death toll in Gaza soaring, we'll ask what victory might look like in this conflict. Can Hamas truly be defeated? Welcome to the programme. This week, the Israeli bombardment of Gaza is intensifying and the ground war has begun as well. The stated aim by Israel is to destroy Hamas in response to the October 7th attacks on Israeli communities. However, this is, of course, not the first time Israel has fought a bloody war in Gaza in an attempt to quash the militant group. So, what happened in those previous battles, and might any lessons be learned? This first report by France 24's Leo McGuinn.
It's been 18 years since the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Since then, its army has only undertaken 3 large-scale military operations into the region. Such ops are rare because the cost of sending ground troops into Gaza is high. In 2006, Israel launched Operation Summer Rains in response to the kidnapping of soldier Gilad Shalit, who had been taken hostage by a Palestinian commando. For the first time, the Israeli army launched a military strategy that would be repeated many times over the years. First, Gaza was bombed en masse before almost 3,000 soldiers were deployed into the region. The operation lasted 5 months. Dozens of Hamas officials were arrested, with the Israeli army suffering very few casualties. But strategically it was a failure. Shalit was not released and would not be until 5 years later in exchange for 1,000 Hamas fighters. The second operation began in December 2008. Israel launched what would become known as the First Gaza War. The aim this time was to put an end to rocket fire and, above all, to destroy the hundreds of tunnels between the enclave and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula, through which arms were transported. For Israel, the modus operandi remained the same. Gaza was bombed en masse before troops entered the enclave on the 3rd of January 2009. 15 days of particularly deadly fighting followed, although Israel claimed to have lost only 10 soldiers. 700 Hamas fighters were killed, as well as almost 900 Palestinian civilians. Many of the tunnels were destroyed, but the Israeli image was damaged publicly because of the collateral victims. Finally, in 2014, after the murder of 3 Israeli teenagers, the IDF launched Protective Edge. But this time, Hamas was ready for a confrontation. Israel once again used its air force before sending in its troops. IDF soldiers were forced to operate in densely populated areas and minefields where they were regularly attacked by Hamas units. After 2 months of operations, there was a heavy death toll. 73 dead on the Israeli side, including 67 soldiers. And according to the UN, over 2,000 Palestinians were killed. 3 operations, but none really decisive against Hamas. This time, Israel says it's determined to destroy the organization, even though it's holding many hostages.
Well, listening to that report was Bilal Saab. He's the director of the Defence and Security Programme at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. He joins us on the programme from there. Thanks for joining us on France 24, sir.
Happy to do this with you. Thank you.
As we saw in that report, Israel tried to destroy Hamas in the 2008 war, in the 2014 war. Israel didn't succeed then. Arguably, actually, Hamas got stronger after those conflicts. So militarily, can Israel succeed this time, do you think?
I'm glad you mentioned the word and the caveat militarily, because that's always possible. The question has always been, what is the military risk that Israel is willing to accept to its soldiers, and what is the political price it's also willing to tolerate? Militarily speaking, Israel has the capacity to massively degrade the organization, perhaps even disarm it. But when you talk about strategic victory, when you're talking about uprooting, when you're talking about wiping out, destroying, annihilating things that the Israeli government has declared since the beginning of this war, that becomes almost like a mission impossible.
Well, indeed, as you're suggesting there, we know that there is a real asymmetry between the Israeli army and Hamas militarily. The IDF, obviously one of the strongest militaries in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean this will be a straightforward campaign for Israel. I want to talk to you about that in a bit more detail in just a moment. But first, France 24's James Vecina crunches some of the numbers for us.
It counts 170,000 personnel, of which 126,000 are soldiers. And Israel also has at its disposal 400,000 reservists. Almost all of them have been mobilised since Hamas's attack on the 7th of October. 360,000, that's 4% of the population. The state allocates over $25 billion a year on defence. That's the 15th biggest budget in the world. Among other things, it allows them to maintain 1,300 tanks and armoured vehicles, 345 fighter planes, as well as drones, submarines and its famed Iron Dome defensive system, which is considered one of the most effective on the planet. Yet Hamas's attack has brought to light a number of flaws. With so many rockets being fired at the same time, the Iron Dome failed to intercept them all.
Israel is known for having a pound-for-pound, very effective military. They're known for having one of the best intelligence services in the world. I think that's still true, but you got to call a spade, and this was a massive, costly failure, and Israel knows that.
And while Hamas's overall strength doesn't come close to Israel's, the group has grown with time. The terrorist organisation manufactures many of its rockets and kamikaze drones within the Gaza Strip, with financial backing from Iran. Israel believes Hamas has a total stock of 30,000 rockets. Other weapons and materials are believed to be smuggled in from Iran, Egypt, Libya, Lebanon or North Korea via the sea and underground. Since rising to power in 2007, Hamas has built a gigantic underground tunnel system.
They have a town underground that they are in control of, not the Israeli army. Hamas have the upper hand underground. Israel has the upper hand from the air, but boots on the ground means fighting underground, and it's not going to be easy.
An underground network that causes a tactical headache for Israeli forces, complicating any targeted attack on the terrorist organisation.
Well, still with me is Bilal Saab. And Bilal, it seems that the Israeli ground campaign for the moment is concentrating on Gaza City in the north of the enclave. We know it's a densely populated area. We know it's full of civilians. So this is going to be urban warfare, isn't it? It will be bloody. In fact, it already is. What's your sense as to how this battle will shape up now?
Not just urban warfare, it's also going to be a subterranean warfare because they have to deal with the tunnels. I mean, this is where Hamas is keeping more than 200 hostages. There's going to be that component to that fight, which adds an incredible layer of complexity to objectives. But I've sensed over the past couple of days some kind of a shift in tactics on the part of the IDF. I think we're now looking at a much more limited set of objectives as opposed to what was declared initially. Looking at something a little bit more surgical as opposed to a full-fledged ground invasion. And I think the logic there is compelling. Frankly, on the one hand, it reduces the risk to the IDF soldiers inside those tunnels. And then, of course, you could reduce collateral damage if you do more surgical strikes. And we can get into those in detail if you want.
And you mentioned the tunnels under Gaza. Is it possible, do you think, for Israel right now to sort of put those tunnels out of use? I'm thinking of the 2006 war that Israel fought with Hezbollah in Lebanon, where tunnels were used to great advantage by that militant group. Clearly, they're an asset to Hamas, so presumably that's a top priority for Israel now.
Out of use? No, that's unrealistic. We're talking about 300 miles of tunnels. This is not your average tunnel. This is far more extensive than one Hezbollah, southern Lebanon. The most you could do is, once again, try to massively degrade and damage that infrastructure to the point where it becomes a little bit more manageable. It becomes a little bit draining for Hamas to operate from them, to fire rockets and missiles from them. But no, there's certainly no way least cost efficiently, to completely destroy that entire tunnel infrastructure. They've tried over the years to degrade it, them and the Egyptians, but they've realized that it's just so vast and it's multi-floored and it's tight and it's deep that there's just no way that you can completely take it out of use.
You've been talking a bit about Israel's objectives and strategy. I'm really interested that you think that potentially Israel's goal here is changing a little. But let's talk about the strategy of Hamas. Israel says Hamas uses human shields. That's one of the reasons they say why so many Palestinians have been killed so far. What do you make of that? Is there evidence that that is Hamas's tactic here?
I want to be incredibly clear. Obviously, I'm sitting here in Washington, so I'm not going to give you accurate analysis or information about whether there's a deliberate and concrete strategy on the part of Hamas to actually use human shields. But it almost doesn't matter because you still end up with collateral damage. You still end up with loss of civilian life on the part of Palestinians in many ways because of the way Hamas fights. Whether they do it deliberately or by default, it doesn't matter.
Bilal Saab from the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I want to thank you very much indeed, sir, for your time and for your analysis on the programme.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to you for watching Middle East Matters here on France 24. We're back at the same time next week. In the meantime, more news to come here on the channel. Bye from me.